Hi guys, Dr. Robert Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. Now I wanted to do a video today on the benefits of fasting or performing a modified fast, but I wanted to look at it from a particular angle. I haven't really done any videos on fasting, and it's not something that I really want to cover that much because I feel there's so much information out there from other people that I would just be repeating what other people say. But one thing that I have always found interesting about fasting that I don't think is covered that often is the way that fasting can elevate your mood, and it appears to be actually a very good treatment for anxiety and depression. And this is something that interests me more rather than the weight loss aspects of fasting. So this video really is going to be having a look at the mood elevating effects of fasting and discussing, and maybe speculating on how those effects come about. This is in nutrition. Often the very simplest things are overlooked, and I know a lot of people who message me. They ask me about supplements. They ask me about amino acids and how they can improve their mood using various herbs. And quite often I think the basics in diet are often overlooked, and there are some very basic things you can do with your diet that will actually have very significant effects on your mood, and performing a modified fast or fasting is one of those things that does appear to have a lot of scientific evidence to support that it is very beneficial. Now, where to start with this? It's very difficult, but because the mechanisms are not fully understood, but it does appear there are a number of studies that have been done on humans, and that's probably the best place to start in this video, is to just review really what's been studied in the literature. There's a number of studies that have looked at modified fasts. We're talking now, just a quick definition: a modified fast is where you consume a small amount of calories. It's not a full fast where you would consume nothing. It's more like severe energy restriction. And there's a number of studies that have looked at modified fasts where subjects are consuming somewhere around 250 to 350 kilocalories a day. So that's quite a low amount of energy. If a normal diet for a normal typical sized man was about 2,000 kilocalories, we're taking that down to about 250 kilocalories. What these studies have found is that most of them have looked obviously at the weight loss effect of these, but some of them have obviously also recorded changes in mood. And I think initially many researchers expected there to be a decrease in mood scores. They expected, obviously, if you go on a fast where you're consuming less calories, that would have negatively affect your mood. But what they actually found was that those people that went on these modified fasts actually had reported improvements in their mood score. In one study, for example, that sticks in my mind, subjects consumed 250 kilocalories, and 80% of the subjects who were consuming that low amount of energy actually reported that they had significant improvements in their outlook, in their overall mood score, with reductions in anxiety and depression. And these are not isolated studies. There are quite a few studies that have looked at this, and generally, the kilocalorie, the energy amount in the diets varies a little bit. The end points of the studies vary slightly, but there is a consistent finding in the nutritional literature that energy restriction in humans does cause elevations in mood, and that's obviously quite interesting, particularly for those people who feel that they have this generalized anxiety syndrome, or they have low levels of mild to moderate depression. I mean, it's very common these days for people to feel these effects, these detrimental effects to mood. More and more people seem to be being affected by the stress that we're exposed to in daily life, and this is really starting to affect people. And this is one thing that you could do that would possibly elevate your mood. Now, obviously, there's a benefit. Sometimes also you get some weight loss as well. But there are other reasons to go on modified fasts, and this may be one of the reasons why fasting is actually beneficial to the mood. I believe that many people's diets, particularly Western diets, contain a lot of allergens, and I think a lot of people are actually allergic to the food that they're consuming in a very mild way. But those allergens, those are effectively toxins in their food. So many people are actually poisoning themselves with the food that they consume on a daily basis. They don't realise that they've got allergens to some of these foods that they're consuming. And I'm not going to go into the types of foods that can cause allergies. There's many different foods in, even in traditional diets. Many people are allergic to dairy, wheat. Citrus fruit is quite commonly produces allergens in people. And the production of allergens and immune response cause inflammation, and inflammation obviously can have detrimental effects on your health. And there is an association between inflammation, particularly obviously in the brain, and detrimental effects to your mood. So that's one possible reason why fasting may actually be beneficial. If you if you reduce the amount of food that you're consuming, even if you continue to consume a typical Western diet, you're massively reducing the allergen load that you're exposing your immune system to, and therefore the inflammation will subside, and you can get benefits and elevations in your mood. Now that's actually problematic as well, because some people actually have the opposite effect, and some allergens can actually cause a euphoria, which is why you keep going back to those foods. So that's quite a difficult thing to that's quite a difficult explanation to actually go to the literature and use as evidence. That's just something I believe. I think my experience in nutrition has shown me that lots of people are allergic to food, and generally those over a chronic consumption of those foods, they can generally have detrimental effects on your mood. So obviously limiting your diet, limiting your energy will reduce those allergens. Another possibility is that fasting is actually very good at normalizing your insulin levels. Most people that consume the typical Western diet have some sort of insulin insensitivity. The sugar, the refined starches, and other compounds in the typical Western diet can interfere with insulin production, and they can interfere with hepatic metabolism of glucose and other carbohydrates. And obviously, if you reduce your calories, one of the benefits that we see, which is actually a direct cause of the weight loss that you see often when people go on a modified fast, is that you're reducing your insulin levels, and you cannot you cannot overestimate how detrimental it is to have elevated levels of insulin. Insulin is a key regulatory hormone. It regulates many other hormones. And once your insulin metabolism becomes dysfunctional, unfortunately that has a knock-on effect on many other hormones, and it's known that insulin directly affects the brain. It's known that insulin affects hormones such as leptin that also directly affect the brain, and therefore elevated levels of insulin that you get when you get insulin resistance, which is very common in those people that consume the typical Western diet. That high levels of insulin very likely has a knock-on effect on other hormones, and it may ultimately moderate hormones such as cortisol, which is the stress hormone that possibly has very detrimental effects on brain function. So that's another reason. It stabilizes blood sugar levels. It increases insulin sensitivity. Going on a modified fast is very good at improving your insulin sensitivity, and insulin is I think very detrimental. Have raised levels of insulin once you've got insulin resistance over the long term is very detrimental to your physical health and your mental health. So there two reasons why fasting may improve your mood. But what's very interesting is when you look at people who suffer from anorexia. Anorexia is obviously a mental disorder, and there's been many studies that have looked at why people would starve themselves in order to be able to lose weight. And one of the interesting findings from many of these studies is that those people with anorexia, they do seem to have a euphoric elevation in mood from this energy restriction. And this could be a very similar mechanism that occurs when normal people who don't have anorexia go on a modified fast. They may get the same types of changes in brain chemistry. Now, a number of studies have looked at these changes in brain chemistry, both in people with anorexia, in animal models, and in healthy humans. And what tends to happen, one of the things that tends to happen when you do go on a modified fast, is that you get a change in your serotonin neurochemistry in your brain, and in particular the rates of serotonin turnover increase. Um, Now, it's very difficult to actually say, to decide what's going on with serotonin, because there are so many different neurons that produce serotonin, there's so many different receptors, and there's so much interaction with other neurotransmitters. It's very difficult to actually pin down specific changes. But there does appear to be this general increase in the turnover of tryptophan. There's an increase in tryptophan transport into the brain, and generally serotonin metabolism, the turnover of serotonin increases. So it could be that there is an increase in the efficiency of the serotonin system when you go on a fast, and serotonin is linked, higher levels of serotonin in certain parts of the brain are linked to elevations in mood. Certainly there is some evidence that low levels of serotonin in parts of the brain are associated with anxiety and depression, particularly depression, and therefore normalizing those serotonin levels may be one of the ways that you feel better after you've been on one of these modified fasts. Um, Another interesting aspect of then, I mean, that's likely, serotonin is likely to change mood, but whether it would cause the euphoria that you tend to associate with certainly some of these studies is questionable. What's more likely to cause the euphoria is changes in your opioid, your endocannabinoid, and your endo-opioid metabolism. Now, you have receptors in your brain for cannabinoids, which are the same compounds that you find in cannabis, and you have receptors in your brain for opioids, which are the same compounds that you find in heroin. And your body produces chemicals very similar to those, which is why you have the receptors. And there does appear to be an upregulation of those chemicals and those systems when you go on a modified fast. And this is where the euphoria regarding fasting could come from. Opioids are really part of the pain relief system in the brain, but they do have other functions, including appetite regulation. And the same can be said for cannabinoids. They also have pain relieving effects, but they also have these regulatory effects on appetite. And anybody that knows anything about people who smoke cannabis will know that after they've smoked cannabis, they become hungry and they tend to snack. And therefore, we know that the cannabinoid system, when it's activated, increases your hunger levels. And this might be one of the side effects of fasting. If you cut your calories, you go on a calorie restricted diet, your body might then upregulate. It would make sense that the body would then upregulate the cannabinoid system, and there are increases in two of the endocannabinoids you have in your brain, which are anandamide and 2-arachidonyl glycerol. Those two chemicals are upregulated, and therefore they're activating cannabinoid receptors in your brain, and it might be that they're trying to stimulate your appetite in order to make you eat more food. But obviously the cannabinoid system is involved in more than just appetite regulation, and some of the things that happen when you get activation of the receptors are you get a decrease in anxiety. It's associated with a reduction in anxiety, and there's also certain pain relieving effects as well, depending on which receptor subtype is activated. But that might be why you get this upregulation of cannabinoids, and there may be a similar effect for opioids. Opioids are also involved in appetite regulation, and therefore when you go on a modified fast, both of these systems may be activated. They're activated because the body understands it's got a limited amount of calories and it's maybe trying to stimulate your appetite. But the side effect of that is that these systems actually make you feel better. They elevate your mood, and that would result in the euphoria that's quite often reported when people do go on a fast. Now, the thing that's difficult to understand about this is that generally those people that do go on a fast, although they get an upregulation initially in their appetite, so the first couple of days that you may be on a modified fast, you may feel hungry. What actually happens after that is that the hunger levels subside, but the euphoria remains. So that's a little bit more difficult to explain, and I'm not going to say that I understand it, because I don't think anybody does. But I just wanted to explain that there are particular changes in the brain that could explain this euphoria you get from fasting. But there is certainly an elevation in mood, and it could relate to serotonin, it could relate to the endocannabinoids, it could relate to the opioid systems in the brain. There are other chemicals as well, like neuropeptide Y, that have also been shown to be modulated during fasting, and they too may have a link to affecting your mood. Or it could be something more general, like a reduction in your insulin, in your insulin level. But there's no reason to suggest that insulin won't control any of these other neurotransmitter systems. Insulin does control these other, the opioid and the cannabinoid system, because they're both regulated in appetite, and insulin is really the main regulator of appetite. If your insulin levels are high, generally your body will turn off your appetite. If your insulin levels are low, it will stimulate your appetite. So the reduction that you get in insulin when you're fasting would signal in the brain to say that your blood sugar levels are dropping, you need more food. In response, your body may upregulate your endocannabinoid and your opioid systems to stimulate the appetite, and as a side effect, that causes this euphoria and this elevation in mood. That's my speculation. It's from reading around the topic, and I'm not saying that's the correct explanation. It's just something that I feel makes sense when you look at this information. But certainly there are also changes in serotonin. There's a more rapid turnover of serotonin, so the serotonin gets used more quickly, but then gets replaced more quickly. That may also have mood elevating effects, or it could be something that hasn't been researched. But what is clear is fasting, modified fasting, does appear to be consistently linked to improvements in mood, and it's not exactly clear why that would be. So, if you do feel that you have the general anxiety syndrome, if you do feel you have mild depression, and you wanted to try and see if modified fasting would be of a benefit, I would recommend that maybe you research what modified fasting is, and have a look and see if there's something that would suit your own needs. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of bloggers, there's a lot of YouTube videos on modified fasting. My feedback from people that have used modified fasting is that it's a very good way of losing weight. Nearly everybody I know that has tried it has lost a considerable amount of weight, not rapidly, but consistently over time. They look better, they feel better, their energy levels go up, and they do report that they feel better. They do have this elevation in mood. And therefore it does appear to be something that could be used intermittently when you need to have that elevation in mood in order to be able to make yourself feel better. I'm not saying it's something that you would stay a modified fast is not something you'd stay on permanently, but there are different ways of fasting, and you can use intermittent fasting, for example. This may also have effects. The trouble is the literature on this is quite limited. Most of it's been done, a lot of it's been done in animals. A lot of the literature on nutrition and mood is really aimed at those people who have anorexia or bulimia. So in healthy people, it's not really been studied that much. Most of the information has come from studies where the fasting has been looked at from a weight loss perspective, rather than from a mood elevating aspect. But that doesn't mean that there aren't reports of these elevated moods. And anecdotally, I think if you ask people that have been on modified fasts, most people report the same elevations in mood, stabilizations of mood. People generally feel calmer, generally feel like they have more energy. So there is something about this that does have beneficial effects. So I would recommend, if you're interested in this, that you do some further research, because it does appear to be one of those things in nutrition that's quite overlooked. It's very simple, it's very cheap, it doesn't cost you anything at all. In fact, you will save you money. You don't need to take supplements, and it will have other health effects as well, such as weight loss, blood pressure lowering effects, cardioprotective effects. And therefore it does appear to be a very healthy way of improving your mood using nutrition. So I hope you found that interesting. As always, eat well, stay healthy, and protect yourself, and I will see you soon for another video. Take care.